My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I stood in the bridal suite of the Grand Harbor Resort watching my younger sister Diana transform into everything I would never be. The makeup artist swept golden highlighter across Diana's cheekbones, while three bridesmaids in lavender silk fussed over the train of her custom Vera Wang gown. The room smelled like expensive perfume and fresh peonies, a stark contrast to the base housing I'd called home for the past 8 years. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I adjusted the sleeves of my simple navy dress, purchased from a department store clearance rack 3 months ago. The fabric was decent enough, but it felt paper thin compared to the designer gowns hanging on every other woman in the room. My hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, old habits die hard, and my makeup consisted of nothing more than mascara and lip balm. Sarah, sweetie, could you help me with this clasp? Diana's voice carried that melodic quality that had charmed everyone since childhood. She was holding a diamond tennis bracelet worth more than my monthly housing allowance. I walked over, my sensible black flats silent on the marble floor. As I worked the delicate clasp, I caught sight of Diana's reflection in the ornate mirror. She looked radiant, glowing with the confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Her fiancé, Bradley Thornton, was heir to a shipping fortune. Their engagement had been featured in Charleston Society magazine. There, I said, stepping back. Perfect. Diana turned and squeezed my hands. Thank you for being here. I know military leave isn't easy to get. Before I could respond, our cousin Jennifer swept into the room, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble. Jennifer worked in public relations for a tech company in Atlanta and never let anyone forget it. She wore a rose gold dress that probably cost more than my car payment and carried herself like she was personally responsible for organizing the entire event. Ladies, we need to discuss the processional order, Jennifer announced, consulting her phone. Diana, you look absolutely stunning. Bradley's family is already seated, and they're exactly as impressive as expected. She glanced at me briefly, her smile faltering for just a moment. Sarah, I wasn't sure about the dress code. Did you need to borrow something more, festive? I felt the familiar heat creep up my neck, but kept my expression neutral. This is fine, thank you. Of course, Jennifer said quickly. Military people are so practical. It's actually quite admirable. The other bridesmaids, Diana's sorority sisters from University of Georgia, exchanged glances. Madison, a real estate agent from Savannah, spoke up. I think Sarah looks lovely, very classic. The pause before classic was barely perceptible, but I caught it. 8 years of reading situations had taught me to notice what people didn't say as much as what they did. Diana was examining herself in the full-length mirror, turning to see the dress from every angle. I can't believe this is really happening. Bradley's taking me to the Bahamas for our honeymoon. 3 weeks at the Four Seasons. 3 weeks, sighed Ashley, another bridesmaid. I'm lucky if I can get 3 days off work. What's the longest vacation you've ever taken, Sarah? I thought about the 6 months I'd spent in a forward operating base in a country I wasn't allowed to name, where showers came from a water bottle, and the closest thing to a vacation was a 20-minute break between briefings. I don't really take vacations. Oh, that's right, Jennifer chimed in. Military people get that deployment pay, though, right? That must be nice. I didn't bother explaining that deployment pay was compensation for being separated from family, living in austere conditions, and working 18-hour days in environments where the wrong decision could get people killed. Instead, I smiled politely. It has its benefits. A soft knock interrupted the conversation. Diana's wedding planner, a meticulously dressed woman named Caroline, peered into the room. Ladies, we need to start moving toward the ceremony space. The gentlemen are already in position. As the bridesmaids gathered their bouquets and began filing out, Diana caught my arm. I'm so glad you could make it home for this. I know it's complicated with your schedule. I wouldn't have missed it, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, Diana was still my baby sister. The Grand Harbor Resort was a sprawling colonial-style property overlooking Charleston Harbor. The ceremony would take place in the gardens, where white chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing an arbor draped with climbing roses. A string quartet played softly as guests found their seats. I took my place at the back of the bridal party line, watching as family members and friends filled the chairs. Bradley's side was a sea of navy blazers and pastel dresses, old Charleston money that carried itself with understated confidence. Our side was more diverse, a mixture of Diana's college friends, our extended family, and a few neighbors from the small town where we'd grown up. Our parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Dad wore the same suit he'd worn to every wedding and funeral for the past 15 years, while Mom had splurged on a new dress from Dillard's. They looked happy, but slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. As we began the processional, I caught snippets of conversation from the seated guests. Which one is the military sister? The one in the Navy. I think she's in the Army or something. Such a shame she couldn't make it to more of the pre-wedding events. Well, you know how it is with that lifestyle. Very limiting. I kept my eyes forward and my pace steady. The gardens were genuinely beautiful, with late spring roses in full bloom and Spanish moss draping the live oaks like natural curtains. The harbor beyond sparkled in the late afternoon sun. When we reached the altar, I took my position and turned to watch Diana make her entrance. She looked like something from a fairy tale, her dress trailing behind her as Dad walked her down the aisle. The expression on Bradley's face was everything a bride could hope for. Pure joy and wonder. The ceremony itself was traditional and elegant. Bradley's family had a long history with St. Michael's Episcopal Church, and their pastor delivered a thoughtful homily about partnership and commitment. When Diana and Bradley exchanged vows, I found myself genuinely moved. Whatever differences existed between our worlds, their love was real. After the ceremony, cocktail hour began on the resort's terrace. A jazz trio played while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The sunset painted the harbor in shades of gold and pink, and for a moment, the setting felt almost magical. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and found a quiet spot near the railing. From here, I could observe the mingling guests without being drawn into conversations I'd rather avoid. "Sarah!" a familiar voice called out. I turned to see my Aunt Patricia approaching, her husband Frank trailing behind. They lived in Colombia and rarely made it to family gatherings. "Aunt Pat, Uncle Frank, so good to see you." "Look at you," Patricia said, embracing me warmly. "Still so thin. Are they feeding you enough in the Army?" "I'm actually in the Air Force," I corrected gently. "And yes, the food's fine." Frank clapped me on the shoulder. "Air Force, that's right, flying jets and all that. Very impressive." I smiled without correcting him. My job had nothing to do with flying jets, but explaining the nuances of intelligence analysis didn't seem worth the effort. "We're so proud of you," Patricia continued. "Serving your country, seeing the world. It must be quite an adventure." Before I could respond, Bradley's mother, Eleanor Thornton, appeared beside us. She was a striking woman in her early 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob and wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "You must be Diana's sister," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Eleanor Thornton, Bradley's mother." "Sarah Mitchell, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thornton. Please call me Eleanor. Diana has told us so much about you. Military service. How admirable. What branch?" "Air Force." "And what do you do there exactly?" The question was asked with polite interest, but I could sense the underlying assumption that my role was probably clerical or administrative. Intelligence analysis. "Oh, how interesting. Like watching radar screens?" Patricia laughed. "Sarah's being modest. She's very accomplished. Tell them about your rank, honey." I felt my jaw tighten slightly. This was exactly the kind of conversation I'd hoped to avoid. "I'm a major." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Major? That sounds quite important." It's a good position," I said carefully.
Frank beamed with pride. Our Sarah's a real success story. Started out at the bottom and worked her way up. Not like these kids today who expect everything handed to them. I caught Eleanor's expression shift almost imperceptibly. The polite interest remained, but something cooler had settled behind her eyes.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. How long have you been in? She asked. 8 years. And you plan to make it a career? The question felt loaded. I'm considering it. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Well, it's certainly a stable option, very practical. Not everyone is suited for the corporate world or entrepreneurship. The dismissal was wrapped in such polite language that Patricia and Frank didn't even notice it, but I heard it clearly. The implication that military service was a fallback option, something you chose when you lacked the vision or capability for something better. Excuse me, I said. I should check on Diana. I moved away from the group, my champagne untouched. The terrace was filling up as more guests arrived for the reception. Laughter and conversation created a pleasant buzz, but I felt increasingly isolated from it all. Near the entrance to the reception hall, I spotted my phone lighting up in my clutch, a text from my commanding officer. Enjoy the family time. Well deserved. Another from my best friend at Langley. How's civilian life treating you? I typed back quick responses, keeping my tone light. No need to burden them with wedding politics. As I put my phone away, I realized I was standing near a group of Bradley's groomsmen. They were discussing their post-college careers, investment banking, law, startup ventures. Their conversation was peppered with references to mutual connections, shared experiences at elite universities, and opportunities that seemed to flow naturally from their social networks. One of them, a tall, blonde man named Harrison, noticed me listening. Are you with the bride or groom? Bride. I'm Diana's sister. Ah, the military sister. Diana mentioned you. That's really cool. My dad was in the Navy for 4 years after college, said it was a great experience. The others nodded politely. One asked, what do you do in the military? Intelligence work. Like James Bond stuff? That's awesome. Very mysterious. The conversation quickly moved on to other topics. I wasn't offended. This was exactly how these interactions usually went. Polite interest followed by the implicit understanding that military service was something interesting but ultimately irrelevant to their world. The sun had set completely now, and the reception hall glowed with warm light from crystal chandeliers. Round tables were set with fine china and elaborate floral arrangements. The head table overlooked the dance floor, where Diana and Bradley would soon have their first dance. I found my assigned seat at table 12 near the back of the room. My table mates were a mixture of Diana's high school friends and distant relatives. They were perfectly pleasant people, but I could already feel the familiar pattern of conversation emerging. Questions about my military service that started with genuine curiosity and gradually revealed the questioner's assumptions about what my life must be like. As I settled into my chair, adjusting the napkin in my lap, I caught sight of Diana at the head table. She was radiant, laughing at something Bradley had whispered in her ear. For a moment, I felt a genuine pang of happiness for her. Whatever complexities existed in my relationship with this world, Diana deserved every moment of joy. The evening was just beginning, and I had no idea that within hours, everything would change. For now, I was simply Sarah Mitchell, the practical military sister in the Navy dress, trying to blend into a world that had never quite known what to make of me. Dinner service began with a flourish as servers in crisp white uniforms emerged from the kitchen carrying silver-domed plates. The menu featured herb-crusted lamb with truffle reduction, seared scallops, and roasted vegetables that probably cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a week. The wine selection included bottles that Bradley's father had personally chosen from his private cellar. At my table, conversation flowed easily among the other guests. Maria Santos, one of Diana's sorority sisters, was regaling everyone with stories from her job at a marketing firm in Atlanta. Next to her sat Robert Chen, a childhood neighbor who now worked as a pediatric nurse, and Linda, a teacher at the local elementary school. Sarah, remind me what you do again? Asked Tom Bradley, Diana's former high school boyfriend who'd remained a family friend. I work in intelligence analysis for the Air Force. Oh, wow. Maria leaned forward with interest. That sounds so secretive and exciting. Do you get to travel a lot? Some. It depends on the assignment. Linda smiled warmly. That must be fascinating work, very important. Before I could respond, laughter erupted from the head table. Bradley was on his feet, champagne glass raised, beginning what appeared to be an impromptu toast to his new bride. His voice carried easily across the reception hall, confident and polished. "To Diana," he said, his Harvard-educated accent clear and commanding, "the most beautiful, intelligent, and accomplished woman I've ever known. She graduated summa cum laude from UGA, built a successful interior design business from nothing, and somehow still found time to plan the wedding of the century." Applause filled the room. Diana blushed prettily, her hand resting on Bradley's arm. And to her family, who raised this incredible woman, her parents, who worked so hard to give their daughters every opportunity, and to Sarah, who chose a different path, serving our country. We're grateful for people like her who keep us safe. More applause, though it felt different somehow. Polite, obligatory. I raised my glass with everyone else, but something about Bradley's tone nagged at me. The phrase "chose a different path" carried an undertone of condescension, as if he were praising a child for trying their best at something beyond their capabilities. As Bradley sat down, conversation at my table resumed, but now it had shifted focus to me. "It must be hard being away from family so much," Robert said sympathetically. "Do you get home often?" "Not as often as I'd like," I admitted. Tom nodded knowingly. "That's the sacrifice you make, right? Trading a normal life for service. Very noble." There it was again, that assumption that military service was somehow a trade-off, a lesser choice made by people who couldn't succeed in the real world. Maria was scrolling through her phone. "I was just reading this article about how hard it is for veterans to transition to civilian careers. All that specialized training doesn't always translate to the private sector." "Sarah's not a veteran yet. She's still active duty." "Right, of course, but it must be something you think about, right? What will you do afterward?" I took a sip of wine, choosing my words carefully. "I focus on my current responsibilities." "Smart approach," Tom said. "One step at a time. Though I imagine it's competitive out there. Everyone's looking for an edge these days." The conversation was interrupted by the DJ announcing the father-daughter dance. Diana and our dad took the floor as My Girl by The Temptations began to play. Dad looked nervous but proud, carefully leading Diana through a simple waltz they'd obviously practiced. Watching them dance, I remembered when Dad had taught me the same steps in our living room when I was 12. Diana had been too young then, more interested in playing with her dolls than learning to dance. But she'd caught up quickly in later years, taking formal lessons for her debutante ball while I was already at the Air Force Academy. Eleanor Thornton appeared at the table next to ours, making her rounds to greet guests. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to hosting large social events, remembering names effortlessly and asking precisely the right questions to make each person feel acknowledged. When she reached our table, her smile was warm but calculated. "I hope everyone is enjoying the evening. The lamb is from Bradley's family's farm in Virginia, completely organic." "Everything is absolutely beautiful," Linda gushed. "You must be so proud." "Thank you, dear. It's been months of planning, but seeing these two together makes it all worthwhile." Eleanor's gaze swept the table and landed on me. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. Major, you said. That's quite impressive for someone so young." I felt the attention of the entire table focus on me. "Thank you." "What would that be equivalent to in the corporate world?" Eleanor asked, tilting her head thoughtfully. "I imagine it's difficult to compare military and civilian hierarchies."
The question seemed innocent enough, but I sensed a trap. "They're quite different structures," I said diplomatically. "Of course," Eleanor nodded. "Bradley started as an associate in his investment firm and worked his way up to vice president in just 5 years. But I suppose the military promotes based on time served, rather than performance." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Maria suddenly became very interested in her dessert plate. "It's actually a combination of factors," I replied evenly. "Performance evaluations, professional military education, leadership experience, and demonstrated competence in increasingly complex assignments."
How fascinating, Eleanor said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. And after 8 years, you've achieved the rank of major. That speaks well of your dedication. Before I could respond, she'd already moved on to the next table, leaving behind the subtle suggestion that 8 years to reach major was somehow underwhelming. Tom was the first to break the awkward silence. "Well, I think it's amazing what you've accomplished. Military life isn't for everyone." "Definitely," Maria agreed quickly. "It takes a special kind of person to handle all that structure and limitations." I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from the table. In the elegant powder room with its marble counters and gold fixtures, I splashed cool water on my wrists and checked my reflection. My dress still looked appropriate, my hair was still neat, but I felt increasingly out of place. When I returned to the reception hall, the dancing had begun in earnest. Diana and Bradley swayed together on the dance floor, lost in their own world. Around them, other couples joined in. Bradley's college friends, with their wives and girlfriends, all of them moving with the easy confidence of people who'd attended dozens of events just like this one. I was making my way back to my table when I overheard a conversation between 2 of Bradley's groomsmen near the bar. They were discussing their weekend plans: sailing, golf at an exclusive country club, and dinner at a restaurant that required reservations months in advance. "Did you meet Diana's sister, the military one asked. "Yeah, nice enough. Bit serious, though. Asked her what she did and got this very formal answer about intelligence work." The first man laughed. "Intelligence work? Like analyzing satellite photos or something?" "Probably. Can't be too complex if they're teaching it to enlisted people." I froze. The casual dismissal in their voices was like a physical blow. They had no idea what intelligence analysis actually involved, no concept of the clearance levels required or the complexity of the work. To them, military service was something people did when they couldn't get into business school. I changed direction, walking toward the terrace instead of my table. Outside, the night air was cool and soothing. The harbor twinkled with lights from anchored boats, and the distant sound of live music drifted from other venues along the waterfront. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate at base. "How's the fancy wedding? Are you feeling completely out of place yet?" I started to type back a diplomatic response, but stopped. The truth was, I did feel out of place. Not because I was ashamed of my choices, but because I was surrounded by people who couldn't conceive that someone might choose military service over wealth and social status for reasons that had nothing to do with limited options. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. "Enjoy the party while you can. Some of us are working tonight." It was followed by a series of coordinates that made my blood run cold. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Those coordinates were in a region I'd been monitoring for months, an area where any sudden activity could indicate a significant threat to national security. The text was obviously meant for someone else, but the fact that it had reached my personal phone was deeply concerning. I was debating whether to report the message immediately when Jennifer approached, slightly unsteady from champagne. "There you are. People are looking for you. It's almost time for the bouquet toss." She studied my face in the dim terrace lighting. "Everything okay? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I said, slipping my phone back into my clutch. "Just getting some air." "Good, because Diana specifically wants you in the bouquet toss. Something about sisterly tradition." Jennifer linked her arm through mine. "Come on, let's get you back inside. The night's just getting started." As she led me back toward the reception hall, I could hear the DJ announcing the bouquet toss over the music and laughter. All the single women were being called to the dance floor, and Diana was standing on the small stage, her bouquet in hand. The crowd laughed and jostled for position, some genuinely eager and others just playing along for the sake of tradition. I found myself pushed toward the back of the group, which suited me fine. Diana turned her back to the crowd and raised the bouquet high. "Okay, ladies, here we go!" The bouquet sailed through the air in a perfect arc, and by some twist of fate, landed directly in my hands. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Diana spun around, beaming with delight. "Sarah, I can't believe it!" she exclaimed, rushing over to hug me. "Maybe you'll be next." The crowd laughed good-naturedly, but I caught the exchange of glances between some of Bradley's family members. The idea of the practical military sister being next to Mary seemed to amuse them in a way that felt more patronizing than celebratory.
As I held the bouquet, an elaborate arrangement of white roses, peonies, and baby's breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that the evening was building towards something I wasn't prepared for. The mysterious text, the subtle condescension, the growing sense that I was being tolerated rather than welcomed, it all combined to create an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with wedding festivities. I managed to smile and raise the bouquet in acknowledgement of the cheers, but my mind was already racing ahead, trying to understand why classified coordinates had appeared on my personal phone and what it might mean for the remainder of the evening. The band transitioned into classic dance music as the reception reached its peak energy. Couples filled the dance floor while others clustered around the bar, their conversations growing louder and more animated as the evening progressed. I retreated to a quieter corner near the gift table, still holding Diana's bouquet and trying to process the strange text message I'd received. The coordinates kept replaying in my mind: 36.7783 degrees north, 119.4179 degrees west, Central Valley, California. An area I'd been tracking for 3 months due to unusual satellite imagery and communication intercepts. If something was happening there tonight, it could be significant. "Quite a catch," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb, Bradley's uncle and a prominent cardiologist from Richmond. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and the kind of assured bearing that came from decades of making life and death decisions. "Thank you," I said, holding up the bouquet. Lucky throw, I suppose. Perhaps, though I've noticed luck often favors those who are prepared for it. His eyes were sharper than his genial smile suggested. "My nephew tells me you're in military intelligence. Fascinating field." Unlike the other conversations I'd had that evening, Dr. Webb's interest felt genuine rather than politely dismissive. "It has its challenges," I replied carefully. "I imagine so. I served briefly myself, Army Medical Corps during Vietnam. Different era, of course, but some things never change. The weight of responsibility, the decisions that affect lives beyond your own immediate circle." Before I could respond, Bradley appeared at Dr. Webb's elbow, slightly flushed from dancing and champagne. "Uncle Marcus, I see you've met Diana's sister. Sarah, my uncle, was just telling me about his golf game yesterday. Shot under par for the first time this season." The shift in conversation was deliberate, steering away from any serious discussion of military service. Dr. Webb's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointing, but he graciously followed Bradley's lead. "Yes, well, retirement has given me more time to focus on my short game," he said with a chuckle, "though I suspect Sarah here faces more pressing concerns than improving her handicap." Bradley laughed, missing the subtle irony in his uncle's tone. "I'm sure Sarah finds time for hobbies. Don't you have some kind of workout routine, military fitness requirements and all that?" The reduction of my life to workout routines and fitness requirements was so absurd that I almost smiled. Instead, I nodded politely. "Something like that." "Diana," Jennifer called across the room. She was standing near the cake table, gesturing for him to join her for the cutting ceremony. "Time for photos." As Bradley excused himself and hurried toward his bride, Dr. Webb lingered for a moment. "My nephew is a good young man, but he's lived a very sheltered life. Success has been handed to him in ways he doesn't fully appreciate." The observation was unexpectedly perceptive, and I found myself studying the older man's face more carefully.
There was an intelligence there that suggested he saw more than he typically revealed. "Sarah!" Jennifer appeared beside us, slightly breathless and holding her phone. "Someone wants to get a picture of all the single ladies with the bouquet for Diana's social media." I suppressed a sigh. The last thing I wanted was to be featured in wedding photos that would inevitably end up on Instagram with captions about catching the bouquet and speculation about my romantic prospects. "I should probably check on my parents first," I said, looking around the room. "Oh, they're fine," Jennifer waved dismissively. "They're talking to some of Bradley's family friends about gardening or something equally riveting. Come on, this'll just take a second." Dr. Webb touched my arm gently. "Perhaps we'll have a chance to continue our conversation later, my dear." I allowed myself to be led toward the photographer's staging area, where 5 other single women were already assembled. Most were Diana's sorority sisters or cousins I barely knew. The photographer, an energetic woman with multiple cameras draped around her neck, began arranging us in a semicircle. "Perfect! Now, Sarah, you're a bouquet winner, so you'll be in the center. Everyone else lean in slightly. Beautiful."
As the camera flashed repeatedly, I caught sight of Eleanor Thornton watching from nearby. She was speaking quietly to another well-dressed woman, their conversation punctuated by occasional glances in my direction. "One more shot," the photographer called out. "This time, everyone look at Sarah and the bouquet." The moment felt surreal, standing in the center of a group of women I barely knew, holding flowers I'd accidentally caught, while being photographed for social media posts that would probably include hashtags like wedding magic and sister love. When the photo session finally ended, I found myself near the dessert station, where servers were arranging an elaborate display of miniature tarts, chocolate truffles, and candied fruits. The level of detail was impressive. Each piece looked like a work of art. "Quite the production, isn't it?" The voice belonged to Harrison Blackwell, one of Bradley's groomsmen who'd spoken to me earlier. He was tall and blonde with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never encountered a problem money couldn't solve. "It's beautiful," I said diplomatically. "Bradley's family doesn't do anything halfway. When they throw a party, they really throw a party." He selected a chocolate truffle from the display. "I heard you caught the bouquet. Lucky you." "So everyone keeps telling me." Harrison laughed. "Not a believer in wedding superstitions?" "I try to base my decisions on more concrete evidence." "Ah, the analytical mind. That's right. You're an intelligence work. Must be interesting, trying to piece together puzzles with incomplete information." His tone was casual, but there was something calculating in his expression that made me wary. "Every job has its challenges." "I imagine so, especially with budget constraints and bureaucratic limitations. Must be frustrating for someone who's obviously intelligent, being stuck in a system that doesn't always reward merit." The comment was expertly crafted, superficially complimentary, while simultaneously demeaning my career choice and suggesting I was somehow trapped by circumstances beyond my control. "I find the work fulfilling," I replied evenly. Of course, of course. Public service is admirable. Though I imagine the pay scale doesn't quite match the private sector for someone with your skills." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't violate my commitment to maintaining family harmony, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number I recognized, my commanding officer's emergency line. "Excuse me," I said to Harrison, stepping away from the dessert table. I found a relatively quiet alcove near the coat check and answered on the 3rd ring. "Major Mitchell?" "Sarah, it's Colonel Reynolds. I'm sorry to disturb you during family leave, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention." My pulse quickened. Colonel Reynolds wasn't the type to make casual weekend calls. "What kind of situation, sir?" "We've detected unusual communication traffic in your area of expertise, something that appears to be time-sensitive. I need you to access secure communications as soon as possible for a full briefing." I glanced around the reception hall, taking in the dancing couples, the elaborate floral arrangements, and the general atmosphere of celebration. "Sir, I'm currently at my sister's wedding reception. The nearest secure facility would be—" "I understand the timing is inconvenient, Major, but this cannot wait until Monday.
We have reason to believe there may be an imminent threat to critical infrastructure. The weight of his words settled over me like a cold blanket. Critical infrastructure threats were Category 1 priorities, the kind of situations that could affect thousands of lives if not addressed immediately. How immediate is imminent, sir? Within the next 6 hours, maybe less. I closed my eyes, thinking rapidly. There was a secure communication facility at the Charleston Air Force Base, about 45 minutes away if traffic was light. But leaving Diana's wedding reception would require explanations I couldn't give and would confirm every stereotype about military personnel being unreliable for family events. Major, are you there? Yes, sir. I'm calculating logistics.
I can have a driver pick you up within 15 minutes. This comes directly from the Pentagon, Sarah. They specifically requested you. The Pentagon. That changed everything. A direct request from Pentagon-level leadership meant this wasn't just another routine assessment. Something significant was happening, something that required my particular expertise and clearance level. Understood, sir. I'll be ready. Good. And Sarah, you might want to prepare for the possibility that this assignment could extend beyond your scheduled leave. I ended the call and stood for a moment in the alcove, listening to the sounds of celebration from the reception hall. Diana's laughter carried over the music, bright and joyful. In a few minutes, I would have to find a way to explain why I was leaving early, knowing that no explanation would be sufficient or believable. My phone buzzed with a text. Black sedan, main entrance, 15 minutes. I looked down at the bouquet still clutched in my hand, its white roses already beginning to wilt slightly in the warm reception hall air. In 15 minutes, I would walk out of this world of designer gowns and champagne toasts and back into the realm of classified briefings and national security threats. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Bradley's friends and family spent the evening discussing golf handicaps and vacation homes, I was about to be pulled into a situation that could affect the safety and security of millions of people, including everyone in this room. I straightened my shoulders and began walking back toward the reception, mentally rehearsing the conversation I would need to have with Ayanna. The moment of truth was approaching faster than I had anticipated, and I was about to discover just how quickly a perfect wedding could transform into something none of us expected. I made my way through the crowded reception hall, weaving between dancing couples and groups of animated guests. The band was playing Sweet Caroline, and nearly everyone was singing along, their voices creating a joyful chorus that seemed to mock the gravity of what I was about to do. Diana was near the head table, laughing with a group of her sorority sisters as they compared photos on their phones. Her face was flushed with happiness and champagne, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're living your perfect moment. "Diana," I said, touching her arm gently, "could I speak with you for a moment, privately?" "Of course." She excused herself from the group and followed me to a relatively quiet corner near the windows overlooking the harbor. "What's up? You look serious." I took a deep breath, hating what I was about to do. "I hate to tell you this, but I need to leave early. Something's come up at work that requires my immediate attention." The joy drained from Diana's face instantly. "Leave? Sarah, it's my wedding night. What could possibly be so important that—" "I can't explain the details, but it's urgent. National security level urgent." Diana stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, hurt, and finally anger. "You're serious? You're actually going to leave my wedding reception for work?" "Diana, I wouldn't if I had any choice." "There's always a choice. This is exactly what everyone said would happen. Mom and Dad defended you, said you'd never miss my wedding, but here you are, proving them all right." The accusation hit harder than any of the evening's subtle slights. "Who said what?" "Everyone, Sarah. Eleanor asked if we should have a backup plan in case you got called away. Bradley's friends made jokes about setting a place for you at dinner, but not counting on you actually staying for dessert. Even Jennifer said we shouldn't put you in any of the important photos because you might not be here for the whole event." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You knew this might happen?" "I hoped it wouldn't,
But yes, I knew it was possible. Because it's always possible with you. Everything else comes first. Your job, your missions, your responsibilities to everyone except your own family. Before I could respond, Eleanor Torton appeared beside us, her timing suspiciously perfect. Is everything all right, girls? Diana, you look upset. Sarah has to leave. Work emergency. Eleanor's eyebrows rose in an expression of sympathetic concern that didn't quite mask her satisfaction. Oh my, how unfortunate. Though I suppose these things happen in certain professions. The way she said certain professions made it sound like I worked at a convenience store rather than for the Department of Defense. I'm truly sorry, I said to Diana, ignoring Eleanor entirely. I know how this looks, but I wouldn't leave unless what? Diana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Unless something more important came up, something is always more important than family with you.
A small crowd was beginning to gather, Bradley approaching with concern, Jennifer hurrying over with her phone already out, several of Diana's friends watching the drama unfold with poorly concealed interest. "What's wrong?" Bradley asked, slipping his arm around Diana's waist. "Sweetheart, you're trembling." "Sarah's leaving," Diana said flatly. "Work called." Bradley's expressions shifted from concern to a kind of resigned disappointment. "Ah, well, I suppose we should have expected this." The casual dismissal in his tone was like a slap. "I'm sorry to disrupt the celebration," I said quietly. "Diana, we can talk tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Jennifer laughed harshly. "Let me guess, you'll be back on a plane tomorrow, off to save the world again." "Actually," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "I'm curious about something. What kind of emergency could possibly require a major to leave a family wedding? Surely there are other people who could handle whatever administrative issues have arisen." The question was posed with perfect politeness, but the implication was clear. What could possibly be so important that it required me specifically, and wasn't I being rather self-important to suggest otherwise? I looked around at the assembled faces, Diana's hurt and anger, Bradley's patronizing disappointment, Eleanor's calculated concern, Jennifer's obvious satisfaction at being proven right about military unreliability. Behind them, I could see other wedding guests beginning to notice the commotion, their conversations trailing off as they turned to watch. "I understand how this appears," I said carefully, "but I can't discuss the nature of the emergency." "Of course you can't," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. "How very mysterious." That's when I saw him, a figure in a dark suit moving purposefully through the reception hall towards us. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that immediately identified him as military, even in civilian clothes. As he got closer, I could see the small pin on his lapel that indicated Pentagon security clearance. The conversations around us began to falter as other guests noticed the stranger's approach. There was something about his presence that commanded attention, the way he moved with absolute purpose, his eyes scanning the room with professional assessment, the subtle but unmistakable authority he projected. He stopped directly in front of our group and addressed me with crisp formality. "Major Mitchell?" "Yes." "I'm Colonel Patterson, Pentagon Strategic Operations. Ma'am, we need to move immediately. The situation has escalated, and the Secretary of Defense is requesting your presence for an emergency briefing." The words fell into the sudden silence like stones into still water. I could see the exact moment when the implications registered on each face around me. The mention of the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, the formal military protocol being executed in the middle of a wedding reception. Eleanor's mouth actually fell open slightly. Bradley took a step backwards as if the colonel's presence had created a physical force field. Jennifer's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. But Diana's expression was the cut deepest. The dawning realization that everything she thought she knew about my career, about my importance, about my reasons for leaving had been completely wrong. Colonel Patterson continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent reception hall.
Major, the communications you've been monitoring for Operation Sentinel have indicated an imminent threat to critical infrastructure. The Joint Chiefs need your analysis within the hour. He paused, then added something that made my blood run cold. We have reason to believe the threat may be targeting the Charleston port facility and surrounding area. A collective gasp rose from the gathered guests. Charleston Port wasn't just some distant facility. It was less than 10 miles from where we stood, the economic heart of the region and home to thousands of workers and their families. Eleanor had gone pale. Bradley was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. But Diana's eyes were wide with something between shock and dawning comprehension. "Ma'am," Colonel Patterson said, "your security detail is waiting outside. We have a direct line to the Pentagon prepared for your immediate consultation." The silence in the reception hall was absolute now. Even the band had stopped playing, the musicians staring along with everyone else. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, processing this impossible reversal of everything they thought they knew. I looked at Diana one more time. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "but this is why I can't stay." Colonel Patterson stepped aside, creating a clear path towards the exit. As I began to walk, the crowd parted before us like water, faces turning to follow our progress across the room.
Near the entrance, Dr. Webb caught my eye. Unlike everyone else, he didn't look shocked. Instead, he nodded slightly, a gesture of respect and understanding that acknowledged what the others were just beginning to grasp. As we reached the doors, I heard Eleanor's voice behind us, shaken and uncertain for the first time all evening. My God, she's actually... But I didn't wait to hear the rest. The moment of revelation was complete, and now the real work began. Outside, a black sedan waited with its engine running, flanked by 2 other vehicles with government plates. The wedding reception continued behind us, but everything had changed. The woman they'd dismissed as an underachieving military clerk was about to help protect them all from a threat they never knew existed. As I slid into the back seat of the sedan, I could see guests pressed against the windows of the reception hall, watching our departure with expressions of stunned disbelief. The last thing I saw before we pulled away was Diana's face in the window, her hand pressed against the glass, finally understanding why her sister had chosen silence over recognition, duty over celebration, and service over everything else. The secure facility at Charleston Air Force Base felt like stepping into a different universe. Within 30 minutes of leaving the wedding, I was standing before 3 wall-mounted screens displaying real-time threat assessments, while technicians in headsets coordinated with agencies across multiple time zones. "Major Mitchell," Colonel Patterson handed me a classified tablet. "The cyber infiltration is more extensive than we initially assessed. They've penetrated not just Charleston, but preliminary probes show similar signatures at Norfolk, Savannah, and Miami." I scanned the data streams, recognizing patterns I'd been tracking for months. This isn't opportunistic. They've been planning a coordinated strike on East Coast shipping for at least 6 months. The lead analyst, Captain Rodriguez, looked up from her workstation. "Ma'am, we're seeing active code deployment beginning now. They're targeting automated systems during the night shift when human oversight is minimal." My fingers moved across the tactical interface, pulling up defensive protocols I'd helped design. "Initiate countermeasure package Delta 9. We need to isolate their access points before they can execute the primary attack sequence." Back at the Grand Harbor Resort, the wedding reception had devolved into hushed conversations and uncomfortable glances. Diana sat in the bridal suite, still in her wedding dress, while Jennifer frantically researched military ranks on her phone. "Listen to this," Jennifer said, reading from her screen. "To reach major in the Air Force typically requires 8 to 12 years of service, multiple deployments, and selection by promotion boards. It's considered a significant leadership position." Madison looked up from her own phone, and I found articles about something called intelligence analysis. It's not just looking at photos. These people brief Congress, advise generals, and work with classified information that affects national security. Diana stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror.
She let us think she was just ordinary. Why would she do that? Eleanor Thornton entered quietly, her earlier confidence notably absent. Diana, I owe you and your sister an apology. I made assumptions based on, well, on my own ignorance about military service. You weren't the only one, Diana replied quietly. We all did. At the Air Force Base, the cyber attack was escalating rapidly. Multiple screens showed the enemy's progress as they attempted to override port security systems and manipulate container movement protocols. They're good, I admitted to Colonel Patterson, but they're following a predictable pattern. They assume we'll react defensively, trying to patch systems as they breach them. What do you recommend? I smiled grimly. We let them think they're succeeding, then redirect their own attack code back at them, turn their strength into their weakness. The next 20 minutes were intense, coordinated chaos. My team monitored enemy movements while I implemented a strategy that would not only stop the attack, but trace it back to its source. The work required split-second timing and absolute precision. Execute reversal protocol now, I ordered. Across the screens, red warning indicators began shifting to green as our countermeasures took effect. The attempted cyber attack wasn't just stopped, it was turned into an intelligence goldmine that would help prevent future operations. My secure phone rang. Major Mitchell, this is General Morrison from the Pentagon. Outstanding work. The President has been briefed and asked me to convey his personal appreciation.
As the immediate crisis passed, I realized that my phone had been buzzing with messages throughout the operation. Diana, I found your commendation letters in Mom's attic. Why didn't you tell us about the Medal of Valor? Another from Dr. Webb. I always knew there was more to your story. But it was the message from my mother that hit hardest. Sarah, I'm sorry we never asked the right questions. We love you and we're proud of you, but I think we never really knew who you are. The truth was, I had chosen invisibility. Not out of modesty, but out of a desire to keep my two worlds separate. The weight of what I did for a living, the lives that hung in the balance of my decisions, the classified operations that could never be discussed felt too heavy to bring home to family dinners and wedding receptions. But tonight had changed everything. The careful compartmentalization I'd maintained for 8 years had been shattered in a single moment, and there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity I'd cultivated. Colonel Patterson approached as I finished securing the classified materials. Major, excellent work tonight, but I suspect your real challenge is just beginning. He was right. Neutralizing a cyber attack was something I'd trained for. Navigating the aftermath of having my true identity revealed to family members who had spent years fundamentally misunderstanding who I was, that was uncharted territory. As I prepared to return to the resort, I knew that the woman who walked back into that reception hall would be someone entirely different from the one who had left. The question was whether my family would be ready for that truth. I returned to the resort at dawn, the morning sun casting long shadows across the empty reception hall. The elaborate floral arrangements from Diana's perfect wedding sat wilted on abandoned tables, a stark reminder of how quickly celebration had transformed into crisis. Diana was waiting in the hotel lobby, still in her wedding dress, but with her hair down and makeup smudged. She looked vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. I couldn't sleep, she said simply. I kept thinking about everything that happened, everything I didn't know about you. We walked out to the terrace where, just hours earlier, I'd received the call that changed everything. The harbor sparkled in the early morning light, peaceful and secure, exactly as it should be. I found these, Diana said, pulling out a manila envelope. Inside were newspaper clippings our mother had saved over the years, articles about military operations I'd been involved in, though my name was never mentioned. One headline read, "Intelligence analysis prevents terrorist attack on shipping lanes." Another, "Anonymous military officer credited with saving civilian lives." I'd never seen these articles before, never knew my work had been covered in the press, even anonymously. "She's been proud of you this whole time," Diana continued. "But she didn't know how to express it because she didn't understand it." I sat down heavily in one of the wrought iron chairs, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I made it impossible for anyone to understand. I thought keeping my two lives separate was protecting everyone. Protecting us from what? From worry, from the weight of knowing what's really out there, from having to think about the kinds of threats I deal with every day. I gestured toward the harbor. "You should be able to plan your wedding without considering whether terrorist organizations might target the port. You should be able to sleep at night without wondering if someone's trying to hack our power grid." Diana sat across from me, her wedding dress spreading around her like white silk water. "But by protecting us from worry, you made us think you didn't matter, that what you do doesn't matter." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed across the terrace. Eleanor Thornton approached, no longer the polished society matron from the night before. She looked older, uncertain, her usual confidence replaced with something approaching humility. "Sarah, I owe you an enormous apology. My behavior last night was inexcusable." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse rather than social politeness. "You didn't know." "That's no excuse. I made assumptions based on my own ignorance and prejudices. I've spent my life in circles where worth is measured by wealth and social status, and I forgot that real value comes from service and sacrifice." She paused, then added quietly, "My father served in Korea. He never talked about it, never sought recognition for it. Last night, watching you walk away with that colonel, I finally understood why. Some people carry the weight of the world quietly, and the rest of us benefit from that silence without ever acknowledging it." Diana reached across and took my hand. "I want to understand now, what you can tell me anyway. I want to know who my sister really is." Over the next hour, as the sun climbed higher and the resort staff began preparing for checkout, I told them what I could about the years of training that had prepared me for moments like last night, about the networks of dedicated people working around the clock to identify and neutralize threats, about the satisfaction that came from protecting people who would never know they'd been in danger. The hardest part, I admitted, isn't the secrecy or the stress. It's coming home to family events and having to smile when people make jokes about military intelligence being an oxymoron, or when they assume I spend my days filing paperwork in some administrative office. Eleanor winced. "I said things like that last night." "You weren't alone, and I let it happen because correcting those assumptions felt like bragging." "It's not bragging if it's true," Diana said firmly. "It's education." 3 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the University of South Carolina, delivering a guest lecture on national security careers. The invitation had come from the political science department, but word had spread, and students from across campus filled the seats. Military intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room, I told the audience. It's about being curious enough to ask the right questions, disciplined enough to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and humble enough to know that you're part of something much larger than yourself. After the lecture, a young woman approached during the reception. "Major Mitchell, I'm studying international relations and I'm considering military service, but my family thinks I'm wasting my potential, that I should go into law or business instead." The question hit close to home. "What do you think?" "I think there are threats out there that most people don't understand, and I want to be part of the solution. But I'm worried about being underestimated, about people not taking me seriously." I smiled, remembering my own doubts 8 years earlier. "Let me tell you something. The people whose opinions matter will take you seriously based on your work, not your job title. And the people who don't take you seriously based on your work, their opinions don't matter." Later that evening, I drove to Diana's new house for our monthly family dinner, a tradition that had started after the wedding and quickly become the highlight of everyone's schedule. Bradley answered the door, his greeting warm and genuine in a way it never had been before the wedding night. "Sarah, come in. Diana has been cooking all afternoon. She's determined to master our grandmother's recipe for chicken and dumplings." The transformation in Bradley's attitude had been remarkable. He'd taken the time to learn about military service, to understand the complexity of what I did, and to recognize that his assumptions about career prestige had been shallow and misguided. Diana emerged from the kitchen, flour in her hair and a triumphant smile on her face. "I think I finally got it right. Third time's the charm." Over dinner, our parents shared news from their retirement activities, while Bradley talked about a new investment fund focused on supporting veteran-owned businesses. The conversation was easy, comfortable, free from the tension that had characterized our family gatherings for years. "Oh," Diana said as we were clearing the table, "I have something to show you." She pulled out her phone and opened to a social media post from Eleanor Thornton. The caption read, "Honored to support the Charleston Military Family Foundation Gala next month, featuring keynote speaker Major Sarah Mitchell, a true American hero and Charleston treasure." She's organized an entire fundraiser around supporting military families, Diana explained. She told me she wants to make sure other people don't make the same mistakes she did. I stared at the post, amazed by Eleanor's transformation from dismissive society matron to genuine advocate. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since Diana's wedding. The cyber attack we'd prevented had indeed been part of a larger coordinated effort, one that our response had helped neutralize before it could spread to other targets. The intelligence we'd gathered that night had led to the arrest of several key operatives and the disruption of future attacks. But the personal victories felt even more significant. My family finally understood not just what I did, but why it mattered. The careful compartmentalization that had protected them from worry had been replaced by honest communication that protected our relationships from misunderstanding. I pulled into my driveway to find a package waiting on my doorstep. Inside was a framed photo from Diana's wedding, not one of the formal portraits, but a candid shot someone had taken during the bouquet toss. In it, I was smiling genuinely for the first time all evening, the bouquet in my hands, surrounded by women who looked happy for me rather than skeptical. A note from Diana was attached, for the woman who protects everyone else's happy endings while creating her own. I hung the photo in my home office, next to my commendations and certificates. It served as a reminder that the most important victories aren't always the ones that make the classified reports or the Pentagon briefings. Sometimes they're as simple as a family that finally understands each other, a community that recognizes hidden service, or a sister who learns to be proud of what she never fully comprehended.
The phone rang, another crisis, another threat assessment, another opportunity to do the work I'd chosen 8 years earlier. But this time, when I answered the call, I knew that the people I was protecting understood the sacrifice being made on their behalf. And that understanding made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.